We've all heard about the brilliance of ancient Egypt, the towering pyramids, the mesmerizing hieroglyphs, and the pharaohs who ruled like gods. But behind all that glory lies a side of their civilization that isn't talked about in classrooms or history books. It's weird. It's uncomfortable, and honestly, it's downright disgusting. Welcome to Nutty History, where today, we're lifting the golden lid on the filthy secrets of ancient Egypt. Not just the quirky, but the repulsive, revolting, and downright outrageous aspects of one of the world's oldest and most celebrated civilizations. From royal rear wiping specialists to pregnancy tests that involve barley and bodily fluids. From parasite-ridden men who thought they were menstruating to cursed mummies with unspeakable surprises. This is not the ancient Egypt you learned about in school. So grab a seat, maybe not a toilet seat, and prepare yourself. Because what you're about to hear will change the way you think about pharaohs, pyramids, and the so-called glory of ancient Egypt forever. Cue the music. This is going to get messy. Let's kick off our journey into the bizarre with something truly intimate. The pharaoh's backside. You might have heard of the groom of the stool, a position from medieval England where one unfortunate soul had the job of wiping the king's royal rear. But guess what? That wasn't a medieval innovation. The ancient Egyptians were already miles ahead in the butt care business, and they took it to divine levels. In ancient Egypt, this sacred duty belonged to a highly respected medical professional called the Nirupehut, literally translated as shepherd of the royal anus. Yes, you heard that right. Not your highness or your highness. This wasn't a servant. This was a qualified proctologist, a court physician trained in rear-end medicine. Why? Because the pharaoh wasn't just a ruler, he was considered a living god. And gods apparently needed the cleanest exits possible. The job wasn't just about wiping, it was about performing holy enemas. According to ancient Greek historians like Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus, Egyptians were obsessed with rear hygiene, and enemas were as common as brushing your teeth. Even the average Egyptian indulged in them regularly, but for the pharaoh it was practically a sacred ritual. One famous shepherd was a physician named Ir-en-Akht, who lived around 2200 BCE. His medical credentials were discovered etched into a recycled door near Giza. He wasn't alone. Ancient Egyptian medicine was full of specialists. There were doctors for the eyes, the stomach, and yes, protectors of the anus. Why the obsession with the backside? Egyptians believed the body produced a corruptive substance called wekadu, and the rear end was its main escape route. So enemas weren't just for comfort. They were a spiritual and medical cleanse, a purge of evil and disease. Even religion got involved. The god Thoth, often depicted with the head of an ibis, was believed to use his bird's curved beak to wash his own behind, a divine role model in hygiene. In this way, enema treatments were not just medicine, they were divine interventions. So next time you imagine Egyptian royalty in gold and jewels, just remember, somewhere nearby, there was a respected man, armed with herbs and a water pot, preparing to perform holy rear maintenance on the living god of Egypt. Welcome to the truly sacred side of history. You'd think that being worshipped as a god would spare you from certain indignities. But if you were a pharaoh in ancient Egypt, maintaining that sculpted divine appearance came with some very dirty side effects. Forget diet and exercise. Egyptian royalty had a shortcut to looking slim and toned. Laxatives. Lots of them. Pharaohs were obsessed with image. They wanted their statues to show off chiseled muscles, narrow waists, and powerful stances. The original Photoshop. But since they also loved feasting like, well, gods, they needed a way to eat non-stop, without packing on the pounds. Enter castor oil laxatives. Royal households kept them in stock like modern medicine cabinets keep painkillers. According to ancient records, many royals took laxatives at least 3 times a month. Some did it even more often. The idea? Flush out everything and stay fit without lifting a single pyramid block. Now, before you imagine this as a spa-like detox experience, let's be clear. This was long before plumbing existed. Bathrooms didn't have flushes, fragrance sprays, or privacy. Indoor toilets were essentially ceramic bowls or pits with little ventilation. Imagine walking into a palace where a pharaoh just detoxed. You'd need a gas mask, not a golden fan. And this wasn't just for royalty. Common people followed the trend too. In Egypt, laxatives became the cure-all. Feeling tired? Take a laxative. Bloated? Laxative. Hungry? Also, laxative. Even for diarrhea, some folks were told to, wait for it, take more laxatives. Yes, it was that bad. The mindset was clear. Better out than in, no matter how much force it took or what came out in the process. We don't have exact records on how many Egyptians fell victim to over-cleansing. But let's be honest. If your wellness routine involves spending half your life in a stinking stone closet, it might be time to question your medical system. But to them, this was devotion. Beauty, after all, came at a very smelly price. Today, pregnancy tests are sleek little strips you can grab at any pharmacy. But over 3,000 years ago in ancient Egypt, you'd need a pouch of barley, a pouch of wheat, and a full bladder. That's right. The earliest pregnancy tests involved urinating on grains. Here's how it worked. A woman who suspected she was pregnant would pee on two separate bags, one filled with barley seeds, the other with wheat. Then she'd wait. If either bag sprouted, it was considered a sign from the gods that she was indeed pregnant. Sound bizarre? Surprisingly, it kind of worked. In 1963, scientists at the U.S. National Institutes of Health tested the method and found it to be about 70% accurate. Not bad for a civilization without microscopes, and it doesn't stop there. This ancient urine test had a built-in gender reveal too. Egyptians believed that if barley sprouted first, the baby would be a boy. If wheat sprouted first, they were expecting a girl. Now, modern science says there's zero biological basis for that part, but it does show how seriously they took the method. But the seed test was just the beginning. Another method, beer and dates. A woman would be made to lie on a mat soaked in a mixture of the two. If she vomited, congratulations, and she was pregnant. If not, maybe try again next month, and that's not even the strangest part. Some Egyptian physicians believed that the body was like a single hollow tube, so they'd insert a clove of garlic or onion into a woman's genitals overnight. If the woman's morning breath smelled like garlic, her pipes were open, meaning she could conceive. If there was no smell, she was deemed infertile. That's right. Bad breath was seen as a fertility test. Other tests involved rubbing special oils over a woman's bare body before bed. In the morning, if her skin looked fresh and ripe, the physician might declare her pregnant. Today, a doctor doing that would lose their license and probably get slapped. Ancient Egyptian medicine was a strange mix of brilliant observations and absolutely wild guesses. They treated childbirth with immense spiritual importance, but their grasp on the human body was still pretty primitive. Take this example. Egyptian men often had blood in their urine, a symptom of a parasitic disease called schistosomiasis, which was rampant at the time. But instead of identifying the disease, they thought men were having a period, just like women. Some even considered it a sign of good health. In ancient Egypt, even your pee could be prophetic or totally misunderstood. But one thing is clear. They tried everything to decode the mysteries of life and birth, even if it meant sticking garlic where the sun doesn't shine. Ancient Egypt was deeply obsessed with life, death, and everything in between. But for all their advanced architecture and spiritual insight, their understanding of the human body could be, well, tragically wrong. One of the strangest beliefs? That men had a monthly cycle, just like women. It was common for Egyptian men to find blood in their urine or stool. But instead of recognizing this as a symptom of disease, many saw it as a natural part of male biology, their version of menstruation. It was even considered a sign of fertility and health. But the truth behind this so-called cycle is a lot more disturbing. The real culprit was a parasitic disease called schistosomiasis, spread through contaminated water, especially in the Nile. It was widespread across the population, and one of its most visible symptoms was blood in excrement or urine. In other words, men weren't cycling. They were infected. The disease wasn't just gross. It was painful, often debilitating, and could be fatal if left untreated. But without microscopes or germ theory, Egyptians had no idea what was actually happening inside their bodies. They chalked it up to spiritual, cleansing, or natural balance rather than parasites eating away at their organs. This wasn't the only misunderstanding. As we saw in their fertility tests, Egyptians thought the entire human body was interconnected through open passages, like plumbing. That's why garlic in the womb was expected to come out on someone's breath. Their interpretations of symptoms were creative but dangerous. Bloating, evil spirits. Vomiting, a curse. Blood in the urine, a gift from the gods. And so, ancient Egyptian men, especially those considered virile or strong, were often hosts to swarms of parasitic worms, unknowingly suffering through what they thought was a sacred monthly event. Imagine being hailed as a model citizen just because you're unknowingly riddled with blood parasites. It's ironic. In a society so obsessed with purity and hygiene, their bodies were often ravaged from within, and their faith in divine or mystical explanations blinded them to the actual illnesses destroying their health. For all their knowledge, ancient Egyptian medicine was still walking in the dark, and sometimes the truth was even more terrifying than their myths. When we think of ancient Egypt, we often imagine powerful queens, priestesses, and goddesses, and it's true. Egyptian women had more rights than most other ancient societies. They could own property, work any job, sue or divorce, and pass down wealth. In many legal ways, they were equals to men. But here's the catch. Socially, they were still seen as inferior. And that meant they weren't protected from one ugly, universal truth: harassment. In public spaces, catcalling was normal. Whistling, jeering, even flashing happened openly, especially during religious festivals. Greek historian Herodotus recorded how men would expose themselves to women while sailing past them on the Nile, shouting crude comments, and no one stopped it. Texts from the time reveal that even Egypt's so-called wisdom literature, the stuff that taught morals and ethics, still viewed women as temptresses or troublemakers. So even though women could go to court, they were often blamed for the violence or abuse they suffered, especially during the Ptolemaic dynasty. But things take an even darker turn when we look at love potions. Egyptians believed deeply in magic, and many men used it as a way to manipulate or control women. Some brewed love potions meant to make a woman fall for them, even if she had no interest. Others aimed to force women into bed, ruin marriages, or even bend someone's will. And the recipes? They weren't romantic. They were straight, out of a horror film. One involved mixing dandruff from a dead man apple pip's barley blood from a tick that bit a black dog, the man's own blood, and, wait for it, his semen. All of this was stirred together and secretly poured into a drink intended for the woman. Let that sink in. If someone could get a woman to drink that, they probably didn't need a love potion. She was already too trusting. But in reality, it was pure manipulation, justified through magical thinking. These weren't harmless love spells. They were tools of control and coercion, disguised as romance. And while we might laugh at the absurdity of the ingredients, today, the intent behind them is chilling. Because no matter the time period, using trickery, fear, or spiritual lies to dominate another person is never harmless. It's exploitation. So yes, ancient Egypt gave the world many wonders. But behind the temples and tombs, it also hid some of the darkest sides of human behavior, ones that still echo in today's world. You've heard the phrase, snitches get stitches. But in ancient Egypt, snitches got stitches. And so did everyone else. Justice under the Pharaohs wasn't just harsh. It was ruthless, and sometimes terrifyingly unfair. Let's rewind to one infamous moment in Egyptian history: the assassination plot against Pharaoh Ramesses III. After the Ye conspiracy was uncovered, it wasn't just the assassins who were punished. Every single person who worked in the palace, from guards to servants, was rounded up and questioned. The court believed that any one of them could have overheard the plot and failed to report it. The punishment? amputation of the ears. No trial, no excuses. Just chop, gone. The logic was cruel. If you had ears and didn't hear anything, maybe you don't deserve ears at all. Whether they actually knew anything didn't matter. It was all about sending a message. This was the birth of fear-based justice. Ancient Egyptian guards weren't trained in modern investigation methods. They didn't play good cop, bad cop. They just played bad cop, every time. The moment a suspect or even a witness was brought in, the interrogation would begin with being tied to a wooden stake. Then came the beatings, hands, feet, limbs, until the victim gave an answer the guards liked. If someone didn't crack under pain, the torment would continue. If they did crack, well, it still wasn't over. Friends and relatives of suspects were often tortured too, just in case they were hiding something. And here's the tragic part. Even the Egyptians knew this kind of brutality led to false confessions. People would say anything to make the pain stop. To combat this, courts added a twisted psychological layer to the process. Before delivering testimony, a witness would be asked to describe their own punishment if they were caught lying. The court already had the real punishment picked out, but forcing the witness to imagine it made the fear more personal, more vivid. No oaths, no Bibles, just mental torment. It was a system built not on truth, but on fear, and it worked. People ratted each other out for even the tiniest suspicions. Rumors became evidence, and silence could be fatal. In a society where even truth-tellers were tortured, ancient Egypt's legal system didn't just break bones, it broke trust, communities, and lives. Justice wasn't blind. It was brutal, blindfolded, and swinging wildly. We often think of ancient Egyptian death rituals as sacred, spiritual, and awe-inspiring. Golden coffins, painted tombs, eternal rest beside the gods. But what we don't always realize is this: dying in ancient Egypt was a business, and a filthy expensive one. If you live in the modern US, you know funerals aren't cheap. A traditional burial can cost over $15,000, and cremation isn't much cheaper. But in ancient Egypt, a civilization obsessed with the afterlife, dying could bankrupt entire families. According to ancient Greek traveler Diodorus Siculus, the highest-tier mummification process cost 1 talent of silver. That's about 66 pounds of silver. In today's money, that would be tens of thousands of dollars, just to make sure your body didn't rot after death. Let's break it down. True mummification wasn't a quick wrap-and-go job. It required linen wraps, natron salt for drying out the body, incense, resin, and oils, and most importantly, skilled labor. If we price that out today, materials, prep work, drying periods, rituals, you're looking at upwards of $70,000 for a full, proper mummification, and that's just for humans. Believe it or not, the rich also mummified their pets. Mummified cats, dogs, even monkeys and ibises, all so they could join their owners in the afterlife. Pet mummification today can cost anywhere from $7,000 to over $100,000. But not everyone could afford this kind of send-off. The rich rested in lavish tombs, surrounded by hand-painted murals, inscribed spells from the Book of the Dead, and detailed pyramid texts to guide their souls to paradise. The poor? They had to cut corners. Literally. If a family couldn't afford a sarcophagus, they might skip embalming altogether. Some bodies were wrapped in basic cloth, buried in shallow desert graves, and left to dry naturally in the sand. Organs were often left intact, and no priests were present to perform purification rites. There were no protective spells, no sacred writings, no tombs, just unmarked graves, exposed to the elements. To be poor in life was hard, but to be poor in death? In Egypt, it meant your journey to the afterlife could be incomplete, or even denied. So while the pyramids stood tall as symbols of power and eternity, most Egyptians were left with nothing but sand and silence. In the end, the mummification industry wasn't just about honoring the dead. It was about status, wealth, and access, even beyond the grave. Of all the mysteries buried in ancient Egypt, None is more famous or more bizarre than the tomb of King Tutankhamun. When British archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered the untouched resting place of the young pharaoh in 1922, it was hailed as the discovery of the century. The treasures were dazzling: gold, jewelry, ancient artifacts, untouched by grave robbers and preserved for over 3,000 years. But amid all the gold and glory, Carter also found something no one expected: a curse and an erection. Let's start with the curse. After the tomb was opened, reports began circulating of mysterious deaths among Carter's team. People whispered of Tut's revenge from beyond the grave, and rumors spread like wildfire. In truth, most of the cursed individuals lived long, healthy lives, including Carter himself. So the curse was mostly myth. But what wasn't a myth? King Tut's mummified body was found with a full-blown erection, a very real, very upright phenomenon. Now let's pause here. Why would an embalmed teenager be preserved with an erect penis? Was it symbolic? Was it a mistake? Some historians believe the positioning was intentional, that Tut was buried this way to symbolize divine power, fertility, or connection to the sun god Ra. Others think it could have been part of a failed resurrection ritual or a statement of defiance after the religious chaos of his father Akhenaten's reign. And then there's an even stranger theory: the penis might not have been his at all. Some researchers have proposed that Tut's embalmers, for reasons still unknown, replaced his member with a more impressive one from another corpse, either to exaggerate his masculinity or to align with spiritual imagery. Regardless of the reason, Tut remains the only Egyptian king ever discovered in such a state. His pitching tent has fascinated and baffled scientists, historians, and internet comedians for decades. It's a reminder that even in death, Egyptian rulers were still political, symbolic, and deeply dramatic figures. Every detail of their burial, from jewelry placement to bodily posture, carried a message, and in Tut's case, that message might have been, "Even in the afterlife, I stand proud." When we think of ancient cultures and gender roles, most people imagine rigid binary systems: men here, women there, with little room to move in between. But in ancient Egypt, things weren't so black and white. In fact, the Egyptians had a surprisingly fluid understanding of gender, especially when it came to the afterlife. Let's start with mythology. Egyptian gods were not limited by male and female identities. Many deities could change gender, combine traits, or shift their form depending on the story. Gods like Adam, the creator, were seen as both male and female, and powerful goddesses like Isis sometimes took on male aspects when performing rituals or acting in authority. To the Egyptians, the soul wasn't confined to a single identity, it evolved. This belief extended to humans after death, too. Because women were often considered socially lower than men in life, a woman who lived a fulfilled and honorable life was believed to transform into a man in the afterlife. Not as a punishment or shame, but as a reward. In their eyes, maleness represented spiritual authority and status beyond the material world. It was seen as a kind of transcendence. Even in life, gender expression wasn't always rigid. Consider Queen Hatshepsut, one of the most powerful rulers in Egypt's history. To assert her role as pharaoh, a title historically reserved for men, she often depicted herself with a fake beard in statues and carvings. She wore the ceremonial kilt and crown of a king, even though everyone knew she was biologically female. Her strategy wasn't deception. It was adaptation. And it worked. She ruled for over 2 decades and is remembered as one of Egypt's most successful leaders. In artwork, gods and goddesses were often drawn with a blend of features: muscular, arms with delicate jewelry, soft facial features with bold, commanding postures. Gender, in many ways, was less about biology and more about symbolism and spiritual role. So while today's world still struggles with gender norms and inclusion, ancient Egypt quietly embraced a far more flexible view, one where identity could evolve, transform, and transcend, especially after death. In a time when most civilizations punished anything outside the binary, Egypt's spiritual landscape was already centuries ahead, a place where who you were in life didn't limit who you could become in eternity. So, what did we really learn today? That the same civilization that gave us geometry, pyramids, and papyrus also gave us divine enemas, beer-based pregnancy tests, and creepy love potions made of corpse dandruff. Ancient Egypt was a land of contradiction, breathtakingly brilliant and at times unbelievably bizarre. Behind the gold masks and towering monuments were real people, people who feared disease, worshipped the body, misunderstood science, and still tried their best to make sense of life, death, and everything in between. Their medical techniques were a strange mix of genius and guesswork. Their beliefs about gender, hygiene, and justice were advanced in some ways, and shockingly brutal in others. From pharaohs with proctologists to mummification price tags, that rival modern funerals, ancient Egypt wasn't just mystical, it was messy, glorious, filthy, unforgettable. So, now we want to hear from you. Did any of these ancient facts surprise you? Have we missed any disgusting, shocking, or just plain weird ancient Egyptian secrets that deserve a spotlight? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more bizarre, offbeat deep dives into history's untold truths, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Twisted Past, where we uncover the parts of the past that textbooks politely skip. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and maybe be grateful for modern plumbing.